I found the dissolution of our partnership buried in a stack of condolence cards, my signature scrawled across the bottom like a bad imitation of my own hand. 2 years later, my stepson Mitchell Coleman digs graves by hand in the cemetery behind Eulogy of Lies Memorials, wearing a bright orange shirt that says, 6 feet under fraud. And I make sure every memorial program we print includes his perjury conviction number right under the prayer for the departed. I'll tell you exactly how that happened. My name is Evelyn Dorsey. I'm 54 years old, a retired medical records supervisor from Callaway Regional Hospital, and for 28 years, I verified signatures on surgical consent forms, insurance claims, and power of attorney documents. I managed the hospital's transition from paper to digital records, training nurses on electronic signature pads while also teaching them that a stylus stroke is still a signature, and a crime if forged. I knew that a signature is a fingerprint of the soul, the pressure of a pen, the angle of a loop, the tiny tremble in a terminal stroke, and I learned to spot a forgery the way a bloodhound catches scent. My late husband, Leonard Coleman, was the quiet architect of a historic Victorian funeral home that had served our town since 1904. The building had a turret, a wraparound porch, and a carriage house we converted into the embalming room. Leonard was the kind of undertaker who kept his books in meticulous leather ledgers, who still used fountain pen ink for death certificates, and who believed that dignity in death was the last honest currency we had. He had one son from his first marriage, Mitchell, and I had raised the boy since he was 15, paid for his mortuary science degree with my savings, and stood beside him when Leonard died of a sudden stroke at 61. Before the dirt had even settled on Leonard's grave, I used his $92,000 life insurance payout to buy a 50% stake in Coleman and Son Funeral Home, because Mitchell said he needed capital to modernize the embalming room, replace the old porcelain embalming table with stainless steel, and I thought family meant forever. I cashed in my own modest retirement savings to supplement the insurance payout so Mitchell wouldn't have to take out a bank loan. I didn't mind. I had no children of my own, and Mitchell, despite a streak of entitlement that I now see was always there, had called me Mom since the wedding. But Leonard, in his quiet way, had pulled me aside the week before the stroke and said, "Evelyn, if I'm gone, watch the ledgers. The numbers never lie, even when people do." I dismissed it as his usual caution, the way he always locked the embalming room at night even though we had an alarm. Now his words echo like a funeral bell. We signed a notarized partnership contract on heavy cream stock, 2 signatures and a seal, and I believed I had secured my future. The contract was 6 pages, and I remember the precise weight of the pen, the slight skip of the nib on the textured paper, the way Leonard would have insisted on an archival quality ink that would not fade in 100 years. The day after the funeral, while the floral arrangements still perfumed the foyer with lilies and carnations, Mitchell and his wife Tiffany arrived to manage rather than mourn. Tiffany was the image-obsessed spouse, a former real estate agent with a designer handbag full of laminated business cards and a smile that calculated equity down to the decimal point. She walked through the viewing parlor like a buyer at an estate sale, touching the velvet drapes, tapping her manicured nail on the mahogany casket display, and nodding as if appraising square footage. "We'll take care of everything, Mom," Mitchell said, patting my shoulder as if I were a fragile vase. They insisted I rest, offered to sort Leonard's desk, and started throwing things into black garbage bags before the breakfast dishes were cleared. I stood in the hallway, my back pressed against the embossed wallpaper, watching Tiffany toss old ledgers, funeral service folders, a leather blotter, and a small rosewood keepsake box into a trash sack. Mitchell glanced at the box and said, "That's just junk, nothing of value." Then they left to pick up lunch, the front door clicking shut with a sound like a bank vault closing. My heart hammered. I pulled the box from the bag, wiped decades of dust off its brass clasp with the hem of my blouse, and locked myself in the bathroom. The box was about the size of a recipe card holder, its surface inlaid with a geometric pattern of lighter wood, sandalwood maybe. The clasp was tarnished but intact, and as I pried it open, the hinges protested with a dry squeak that echoed off the bathroom tile. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, lay a single leather-bound notebook, smaller than Leonard's usual ledgers, maybe 5 by 7 inches, with gilt edges that had flaked in tiny gold crescents onto the velvet. The leather was supple, darkened by his hands, and it smelled faintly of formaldehyde and Old Spice. I flipped to the last page and recognized his tight, deliberate handwriting, each letter formed with a draftsman's precision. It said, "Evelyn, do not trust Mitchell. I have watched him lie about invoices and pocket cemetery fees. He is not my son in spirit. Protect yourself. If anything happens to me, the partnership contract is your only shield. Do not sign anything without your own attorney. Save yourself." Underneath, he had written a date, 3 days before the stroke. I read the words 3 times, tracing each loop of his handwriting with my fingertip. I had seen his signature on 1,000 death certificates, but this message was different. It was a private urgency, the ink slightly heavier where he pressed down on the final period. Beneath the warning, he had drawn a small, precise star, the same symbol he used to mark important entries in his business diaries. I closed the notebook and held it against my chest, feeling the thud of my heartbeat against the leather. I didn't cry. I had cried enough already, and my tears had been dehydrated by shock. Instead, I felt a cold, clarifying anger, like the first sip of iced water after a fever. I sat on the cold tile floor, the hexagonal pattern pressing into my legs, and felt my heart crack into pieces, each shard a memory of family dinners and graduations that had all been built on a lie. But I also felt the first cold tendril of clarity, a quiet voice reminding me that Leonard had never been wrong about human nature. Before I continue this story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe that blood doesn't excuse betrayal, and that a signature should mean something heavier than a lie. Within 48 hours, the manipulation began. Mitchell sat me at the dining table, Tiffany hovering behind his chair like a sentinel. He stacked papers with the solemnity of a funeral director arranging casket pillows. "Mom, we need to talk about the future. You've been through so much, and this big old house, the business, it's too much for you to handle alone. Tiffany and I want to take the burden off your shoulders. We'll buy your share, you can move in with us, and we'll take care of you for the rest of your life." His voice was silk, the same tone he used with grieving widows when upselling embalming packages. He slid a dissolution agreement across the polished oak, 3 pages of densely packed small print. The terms proposed to terminate my partnership in exchange for a generous payment of $4,500, exactly the amount of a basic cremation package, down to the dollar. I saw the calculation behind his eyes immediately. He was offering me my own insurance money back, as if I had merely made a temporary loan, while the funeral home itself, the land, the antique embalming equipment, the property he was already negotiating to sell to a corporate consolidator called Eternal Rest Corps, had been appraised 3 months prior at $780,000. The document included a clause waiving my right to any future claim on business assets, and another that would transfer my vote to him as managing partner. I studied the dissolution agreement while he watched, his fingers drumming the table. I needed time to think, so I deliberately squinted at the small print and said, "Mitchell, my eyes are so tired. Could you read it aloud for me? I can't make out the legal jargon." He huffed, but he read the first paragraph, and I used those precious minutes to memorize the heading: Partnership Dissolution and Mutual Release of Claims. I noticed that the notary line was already stamped, but the date was blank, a red flag any records supervisor would spot. While he droned on, I committed every irregularity to memory. I let my hand tremble as I picked up a pen. I deliberately fumbled the cap, let it roll onto the floor. "I'm so foggy from grief," I said, my voice thin and wavering. "Let me think about it." He smiled, a tight, rehearsed curve, and Tiffany brought me chamomile tea in a cup so delicate I could feel the heat through the porcelain. I took a sip and let my eyelids droop, playing the part of a confused widow who couldn't balance a checkbook. That night, Tiffany brought me another mug of chamomile with a single drop of lavender oil, and she sat on the edge of my bed, patting my hand. "You're so strong, Evelyn. Leonard would want you to take it easy. We'll handle all the paperwork, just initial where I put the little sticky tabs." I accepted the tea and took a small sip, then set the mug on the nightstand and closed my eyes. When I heard her soft footsteps retreat and the click of the door, I poured the tea down the bathroom sink and rinsed the mug, just in case. I had learned from medical records that some elderly people were given far more than chamomile by relatives eager for a signature. I wasn't taking any chances. They moved me into their guest bedroom the following week. I packed a single suitcase, a few changes of clothes, my toiletries, and the rosewood box tucked beneath a folded cardigan. The guest room had floral wallpaper and a window that overlooked the side yard, and the lock on the door was a simple privacy set, no keyhole, perfect for their assumption of my passivity. I shuffled around in slippers, muttered about remembering things later, and let them believe they were taking control. I watched everything. Mitchell started taking frantic phone calls at odd hours. I'd hear him pacing in the kitchen, his loafers clicking on the travertine tile, voice strained. "I told you the appraisal is clean, the title is unencumbered, just give me 2 more weeks." "No, she's not a problem. She's half senile. She can't even remember where she put her reading glasses." One Tuesday, Mitchell took a call in the pantry, thinking the closed door muffled his voice, but I stood just outside with a feather duster, pretending to clean the hallway wainscoting. I heard him say, "The old bat hasn't signed yet. I told you the appraisal is solid, and the corporate buyer is getting impatient. They're offering a premium because of the historic landmark status. No, she's not a problem. She's practically a ghost wandering around in her own house. Give me until the end of the month." Then he slammed the pantry door and a jar of pickles shattered on the floor. He cursed, and I quickly slipped into the guest room and closed the door, my heart hammering. He'd hang up and kick the baseboard with a muffled thud. I noted every call, every twitch, the time of day, the side of the house he favored for the most heated conversations. Tiffany started spending like a lottery winner who expected the windfall to last forever. New granite countertops appeared in the kitchen. A leased Mercedes gleamed in the driveway with temporary plates, and the credit card statements I, accidentally, glimpsed when she left her purse open on the kitchen island showed 5-figure charges at high-end furniture stores and a spa that offered executive relaxation retreats. She came home one afternoon with a painting wrapped in brown paper, a large abstract oil in garish reds and golds. She told Mitchell it was an investment piece and had cost $14,000. I saw the receipt sticking out of her purse later. The gallery was in a coastal resort town 2 hours away, and the date was the day after Leonard's funeral. She hadn't been mourning. She had been shopping with money that wasn't hers. Meanwhile, the funeral home's business account, which I could still monitor online because my login was tied to my social security number as a listed owner, began hemorrhaging money. There were cash withdrawals of $9,000 each, always just under the reporting threshold, and mysterious vendor payments to a shell company called TCM Consulting, which had no website, no phone listing, and a registered agent in a strip mall in Nevada. I printed those statements on a library computer the next time they left me alone, folding the pages into my pocket like contraband. The investigation phase deepened when I used my old skills. One afternoon, a pipe burst under the bathroom sink while Mitchell and Tiffany were out at charity gala, networking for the funeral home's image. Water sprayed across the vanity, pooling on the marble. I called Tiffany and she wailed, "I don't know what to do, call a plumber, just don't let it ruin the hardwood." I didn't call anyone. I went to the garage, found a pipe wrench hanging on a pegboard next to a half-used can of plumber's putty and a roll of Teflon tape. I knew from my hospital maintenance days that the valve likely had a worn O-ring or a loose compression nut. I cut the water at the main shutoff in the crawl space, using a flashlight I found in a kitchen drawer. The crawl space was dark and smelled of damp earth, but I crawled under the joists and turned the valve clockwise until it stopped. Back in the bathroom, I disassembled the trap, releasing a few gallons of rusty water into a mop bucket, and then unscrewed the old valve with the wrench. The threads on the supply line were corroded, so I cleaned them with a wire brush and wrapped them tightly with 6 turns of the Teflon tape, clockwise so it wouldn't unravel. I tightened the new valve, turned the water back on, and watched the joint for leaks. Nothing, not a single drip. I wiped down the cabinet, put the tools back exactly as I'd found them, and scrubbed the rust off my hands with the pumice soap in the laundry room. When Mitchell returned, he stared at the clean repair, the dry cabinet floor, and said, "I didn't know you could do that." I shrugged and said, "Nurses pick up things." That was the moment he should have realized I wasn't helpless, but greed had already dulled his perception. A few days later, I staged a small household accident to access his home office. I tripped on the edge of an area rug while carrying a stack of towels, lurching sideways into a bookshelf and sending a row of leather-bound law volumes tumbling. The shelf teetered, exposing a locked filing cabinet wedged behind it in the corner of Mitchell's home office. The cabinet was a low-end metal box with a wafer tumbler lock, the kind you could buy at any office supply store for $40. That night, after I heard their bedroom door close and the murmur of television, I crept downstairs in sock feet. I took a stiff paperclip from a kitchen drawer and a tension wrench I had bent from a hairpin earlier, using a pair of needle-nose pliers I found in the garage. I had straightened the paperclip and then bent a tiny hook at the end. The mechanics of a wafer lock are simple. You insert the tension wrench to apply light rotational pressure, then rake the wafers with the pick until each one sets. I hadn't picked a lock since my 20s, when a janitor at Callaway named Mr. Del Vecchio taught me in exchange for helping him organize his medical waste manifests. He used to say, "Wafer locks are forgiving. Just rake gently and listen for the click." The memory flooded back. The smell of ammonia, the click of tumblers, the satisfaction of a mechanism yielding. I inserted the paperclip, felt the springy resistance of the first wafer, raked gently, and within 3 minutes the lock turned with a soft snick. Inside, I found a manila folder labeled Partnership Dissolution, Final. It contained the original partnership contract, my real signature crisp and dark, a blank sheet of the same cream stock with my signature traced in faint pencil, obviously the template they used to practice, and a certified mail receipt for the forged dissolution they had sent to the county recorder's office, backdated by 6 weeks. I also found a living trust transfer form that listed me as a deceased settler, complete with a forged date of death and a fraudulent power of attorney. The most damning document was a promissory note from a private lender for $120,000, co-signed with my name and secured by the funeral home's real estate. The notary stamp displayed a commission number that I immediately recognized as invalid. From across a quarter-century of verifying medical affidavits, I knew that active notary commissions in our county had a specific numbering sequence that started with a county prefix and a year code. This stamp had a generic number that belonged to a notary whose commission had expired 3 years earlier and had never been renewed. The forgery itself was clumsy. The Y in Evelyn was missing its final tail, a loop I always made with a quick upward flick, no pause. I photographed every page with my phone, the camera flashed a silent accusation. I replaced everything exactly as I found it, aligning pages to my original photographs, and locked the cabinet. My heart pounded so hard I felt my pulse in my temples, but my hands were steady, the same steadiness I'd developed when filing critical care documents under time pressure. I dug deeper that same night. Using the bank's online portal from my phone under the covers, I cross-referenced the promissory note against transaction records. The loan had funded into an account at a regional credit union, and from there, wire transfers shot out to a holding company in Delaware that matched the name on the Shell Consulting invoices. I also discovered, through a series of queries on the county property appraiser's website, that Mitchell had taken out a second mortgage on his own house, fraudulently listing me as a co-signer using the forged signature to cover Tiffany's credit card debt. The amortization schedule, which I reconstructed from the loan document's small print, showed a balloon payment coming due in 60 days, an amount that exceeded the remaining equity in the house. If the corporate buyout didn't close before that deadline, the loan would default and the bank would foreclose on the house, and since my forged name was on the note, I would be jointly liable. I realized then that I was not just a silent partner being pushed out, I was the intended scapegoat for massive debt. A perfect mark because a grieving widow with no surviving biological children would be easy to paint as confused and complicit, a woman who signed documents she didn't understand. I also traced TCM Consulting to its source. I navigated to the Secretary of State's business registry for Nevada and searched the name. The registered agent was listed as a Travis C. Morrison, with a residential address in Sparks. A quick background check on a public data site showed Travis Morrison was Tiffany's maiden name, her younger brother. A shell company, right there in plain sight. I needed an ally, and I found one the next morning. I called the fraud department of the bank that held the funeral home's commercial account, a regional institution with a reputation for conservative lending. A woman named Angela Delgado, a senior compliance investigator, took my call. She had a calm, deliberate voice, the kind that suggests she has heard every variation of financial deceit. I explained that I was a 50% owner of a business and that my partner had forged my signature on a dissolution, a loan, and likely a corporate sale contract. I described the cash withdrawals of $9,000, the shell company payments, and the forged promissory note. She listened without interruption, then said, "Mrs. Dorsey, I've already flagged suspicious activity on that account." The wire instructions for the buyout were supposed to go to a joint escrow, as per our standard operating procedure for multi-owner entities. Your partner insisted on a sole payee arrangement, which violated our internal protocols and triggered a hard stop on my desk. If you can provide the evidence you described, we can freeze the assets under a suspicious activity report and refer the matter to the FBI for bank fraud, which carries mandatory federal time. She added that structuring those cash withdrawals was itself a felony under the Bank Secrecy Act. I emailed the photographs from an encrypted library terminal, and within 2 hours, a temporary administrative hold slammed down on every account linked to the funeral home and Mitchell's personal finances. Angela called back to confirm the freeze, adding that the credit union had also placed a hold on the private loan pending verification of the co-signer's consent, and that Treasury's Financial Crimes Enforcement Network might flag Mitchell, complicating any real estate deals even further. That same day, I scheduled a meeting with Leonard's estate attorney, Mr. Harlan, a man in his 70s with a shock of white hair and a tweed jacket that smelled of pipe tobacco. He welcomed me into his office, a dim, book-lined space that felt like a legal chapel. I showed him the notebook entry, the forged documents, and the bank's confirmation. Mr. Harlan removed his glasses and polished them slowly. "Evelyn," Leonard was a cautious man. He came to me 2 years ago with concerns about Mitchell's handling of trust funds from pre-need funeral contracts. He didn't have proof then, just patterns, but he wanted protection for you. We structured a revocable living trust that holds the funeral home's real estate. He pulled out a thick binder, the Leonard Coleman Revocable Living Trust, and flipped to Article 12, subsection C. Here it is. In the event any partner, heir, or beneficiary attempts to alienate, encumber, or dissolve the partnership interest held by the co-trustee without a live, notarized, and contemporaneously witnessed consent by said co-trustee and a court-appointed guardian ad litem, all assets shall immediately transfer to a conservatorship under the supervision of the probate court, and the co-trustee shall be appointed sole manager. Leonard added that clause 18 months ago after he saw irregularities in the pre-need burial trust accounts. He told me, "I don't trust Mitchell with Evelyn's future. Make it ironclad." The relief that washed over me was so profound I felt tears sting my eyes, but I blinked them back. The trust's dead man switch had already triggered by operation of law because of the forged dissolution, and Mr. Harlan had filed the notice with the court that morning. The property was frozen in my favor as the sole trustee, meaning the corporate buyout could not close and Mitchell could not encumber a single acre. Leonard never wanted you to be a victim. He built a legal fortress around you, brick by brick, and the only key is your genuine signature, witnessed live, which Mitchell will never obtain. Yet before the final confrontation, I needed to test whether any scrap of humanity remained in the boy I had raised. I staged a medical crisis on a Sunday morning. I walked into the kitchen while Mitchell was eating his avocado toast, the bread slightly burnt, and Tiffany was scrolling her phone, a half-empty mimosa beside her. I knew Mitchell would be at the table at exactly 8:42 because he was comically predictable. I walked in, holding a manila folder containing a duplicate copy of the partnership contract, and set it on the counter as if I had just been reading it. I clutched my chest, let out a strangled gasp, and collapsed onto the linoleum, my knees hitting hard, then my hip, then my shoulder. I lay still, eyes cracked open a sliver, my breath shallow. Tiffany screamed, "What's wrong with her? Mitchell, do something." He stood up slowly, chewing the last bite of toast. He did not call 911. He did not kneel to check my pulse or tilt my head to clear an airway. He stepped over my body, his loafer brushing my outstretched hand, and leaned down to the counter where I had placed the folder. He grabbed it, held it against his chest, and walked out of the room saying, "I need this more than she needs an ambulance. Call someone if you want, I'm not getting involved." Tiffany followed him, her heels clicking away. I lay there for 3 full minutes, counting the pattern of the linoleum tiles, 12-inch squares in a faux terracotta pattern Tiffany had chosen to look Tuscan. I listened to the silence of the house, then heard his car start and pull out of the driveway. I sat up, dusted off my slacks, and walked to the kitchen window. The Mercedes was backing out, Mitchell alone in the car, the folder on the passenger seat. He hadn't even called an ambulance. That moment was the point of no return. I felt the last tether of maternal loyalty snap clean and cold, like a guitar string under too much tension. I stopped being his stepmother and started being a debt collector for the truth. The confrontation arrived on a damp Tuesday morning. Mitchell, dressed in his Navy suit, the one he reserved for high-end funerals, and handed me a fringed shawl as if costuming me for a role. "We're going to the bank, Mom. Time to sign the papers so we can all move on. The notary's already scheduled." He helped me into the passenger seat of the leased Mercedes, his hand firm on my elbow, and Tiffany settled in the back seat, her perfume a cloud of tuberose. The drive took 15 minutes along streets I knew my entire life, past the library where Leonard and I first met, past the old cinema turned into a yoga studio. Mitchell kept up a stream of soothing chatter about how this was for the best, how I'd have a comfortable room in their house forever. We parked at the First National branch on Elm Street, the same branch where Leonard and I had taken out our mortgage decades before. Inside, a banker named Mr. Parsons, a timid man with cufflinks shaped like tiny coins, led us to a private office with a mahogany table that reflected the overhead lighting. The forged dissolution lay centered on a leather blotter, along with a trust transfer document that would convey my shares to Mitchell's revocable trust, a step necessary to circumvent the old living trust he didn't know was already triggered. A mobile notary sat in the corner, a young woman in a gray pantsuit with a temporary badge clipped to her lapel, looking uncomfortable. Mitchell pulled out a chair for me and placed a pen on top of the dissolution. "Just sign right there on the partner signature line, Mom, and this is all over. You'll get your check for the cremation, the settlement, and we'll be done." I picked up the pen, examined it as if admiring the weight, then looked at the document. The forgery was glaring now that I had studied the original under a magnifying lamp I found in Leonard's desk. The base of the capital E in Evelyn swooped left instead of right, a mirror image error typical of traced signatures from a flipped photocopy. The pressure points were wrong, heavy on the upstroke instead of the downstroke, indicating hesitation. The date was in blue ballpoint ink, but every legitimate contract I had ever signed for the funeral home was witnessed in black archival ink, a detail Leonard insisted on because blue fades differently over decades. I set the pen down with a deliberate click and placed my hands flat on the table. "I'm not signing that," I said, my voice level and quiet. "That's not my signature. I've never seen this document before, but I believe the bank's security cameras, the notary's journal, and the FBI forensic accountant waiting in the lobby would like to discuss how Mitchell Coleman forged my name on a $120,000 loan, a dissolution, and a $780,000 sale contract." Mitchell's face went the color of cold ashes. "You're confused, Evelyn. You don't know what you're saying. The grief has twisted your memory." He reached for the pen, but the door opened and 2 federal agents in plainclothes stepped in, badges held at waist level. Angela Delgado followed, carrying a thick manila envelope and a laptop. The forensic examiner, a woman with a magnifying loupe threaded onto a cord around her neck, approached the table and laid a photocopy of the original partnership contract beside the dissolution. She used a digital microscope connected to a tablet, projecting the signature onto the wall. She spoke in the flat tone of an expert witness. 14 points of deviation, including baseline slant, pen lift pattern, and terminal stroke retracing, all characteristic of a traced forgery from a second-generation photocopy. The ink composition also differs. The dissolution uses a dye-based blue that was not commercially available until 18 months after the original contract was signed. The forger's tremors are visible here in the hesitation marks. This isn't even a skilled forgery, it's a child's tracing. The mobile notary began to tremble, stammering that she had only been hired that morning through a temp agency and that Mitchell had provided the document already notarized, asking her to merely witness his signature. She opened her notary journal, and the entry for that day was blank. Mitchell had planned to fill it in after I signed, backdating the whole thing. An agent confiscated the journal as evidence. Later, it was proven that the notary stamp on the loan document had been stolen from a retired clerk, and the journal entry backdated using correction fluid. Mitchell was handcuffed, the metallic ratchet of the restraints echoing off the wood-paneled walls. The agents recited his rights, and he started to protest, then fell silent, his jaw working as if chewing on the reality of his collapse. Tiffany began shrieking about lawyers and false accusations, but an agent produced a printed transcript of her phone calls with the Eternal Rest Corps merger specialist, conversations that included phrases like, "manage the old widow," and "she'll sign anything if we say it's for Leonard's memory." I walked out of the bank on my own feet, the morning sun breaking through the overcast, and I did not look back at the squad car pulling into the lot. The aftermath unfolded with the precision of a funeral liturgy. The corporate buyout collapsed within the week because Eternal Rest Corps could not acquire a title that was frozen by a court order under the Leonard Coleman Revocable Living Trust. Mr. Harlan filed the conservatorship motion, and it was granted ex parte. The trust's dead man's switch clause, now public record, became a small legend in estate planning circles. I received a certified letter from the court confirming that the funeral home property and all its associated assets were under my sole trusteeship, free and clear, with no encumbrances. The trial lasted 3 weeks. The prosecution presented bank records, the photographed documents, my testimony as a medical records expert on signature authentication, and the damning security footage from a neighbor's doorbell camera that showed Mitchell stepping over my prone body in the kitchen to grab the folder. That video was played in court, and the jury's collective intake of breath was audible. The prosecution also called an expert in elder financial abuse typologies who explained that Mitchell's pattern, isolating the victim, moving her into his home, offering help with paperwork, was textbook coercive control. I testified about the specific stroke characteristics of my signature, the difference between a genuine signature's direct pressure and the tremulous tracing of a forger, and I demonstrated on an oversized exhibit board how the Y in my name ended with a flourish Mitchell had never replicated. The defense argued that I had consented verbally, but the contract's language requiring written consent was ironclad. On the stand, Angela Delgado explained the suspicious activity report, the wire transfer anomalies, and the false notarization. The forensic document examiner demonstrated the 14 deviation points with a laser pointer. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Mitchell was convicted on 17 counts: bank fraud, forgery, perjury, elder financial abuse, and conspiracy to commit wire fraud. The judge, an iron-willed woman named Judge Ramos, addressed Mitchell directly during sentencing. She said, "Mr. Coleman, you used death as a stepping stone, and you treated the woman who raised you as a disposable tool. The law has a mechanism for that. You will serve 6 years in federal prison, but I am suspending 4 of those years under strict conditions. You will perform 500 hours of community service at the cemetery behind the funeral home you attempted to steal. You will dig graves by hand. Every single hour must be logged and verified by the cemetery superintendent. If you miss a session, the suspended sentence will be revoked." She also ordered full restitution. The $120,000 promissory note was void ab initio. The lease on the Mercedes was terminated. The granite countertops were stripped from the house by a court-appointed receiver and sold at auction. And Tiffany's collection of designer handbags was cataloged and liquidated to repay the fraudulent loan. The house itself received a judgment lien that would force a sale after Mitchell's incarceration. I took full ownership of the funeral home and immediately set about reclaiming its integrity. I renamed it Eulogy of Lies Memorials, a name that honored truth and warned against deceit. The process of rebranding was methodical. I repainted the Victorian exterior a somber slate blue with cream trim, the colors Leonard had ever so often mentioned in his ledger, designed a wrought iron sign with the new name in gold leaf, and updated every business license and insurance certificate. I retained every staff member who had been loyal to Leonard, the embalmer, the office manager, the groundskeepers, and I hired a forensic accountant to audit the books and implement new financial controls. We recovered a portion of the siphoned funds through clawback provisions in the bank's commercial crime insurance policy, and a civil judgment allowed us to garnish future wages. I hired a local historian to write a pamphlet on the funeral home's legacy, including Leonard's vision and the recent restoration of integrity. We held an open house, serving coffee and finger sandwiches, and I unveiled the new sign. The local paper ran a double-page feature. "Widow outsmarts funeral home fraud, renames business Eulogy of Lies. with a photo of me in front of the turret, holding Leonard's leather notebook. I kept that article framed in the parlor. Then, the community service began. Mitchell reported to the cemetery every Saturday at dawn, wearing a high-visibility orange shirt that I had a local print shop produce in bulk. I designed it myself. The front bore the Eulogy of Lies Memorials logo, and the back read, 6 feet under fraud in bold lettering with a small shovel icon and the court case number. I ensured the orange fabric met ANSI high-visibility standards so there could be no safety objection. The cemetery supervisor, a man named Gus, told me Mitchell protested, but Gus said, "You wear what I tell you or you go back to the judge." So Mitchell digs graves by hand. No backhoe, just a long-handled spade, a pickaxe for the rocky soil, and a plot number. He has to measure the dimensions with a collapsible ruler, square the walls with a string line and a level, and sometimes, when the ground is frozen in January, he pounds through frost with a breaker bar while mourners watch from the chapel windows across the lawn. He digs to a depth of 4.5 feet for a standard liner, shovelful by shovelful, and the dirt piles beside each new grave like a slow tally of his penance. I do not stand over him gloating. I do not need to. The work speaks its own sermon. At Eulogy of Lies Memorials, we handle every service with a transparency that has become our hallmark. Our general price list is printed on the back of every program, itemized down to the cost of the embalming fluid ounce and the prayer card stock. We include a section called the Dignity Assurance, outlining exactly how pre-need funds are held in trust. But the most requested feature, and the one that gives me quiet satisfaction, is the memorial program template I designed. Under the closing hymn title, right after the committal prayer, there is a small line in 10-point serif type that reads, "This funeral home is owned and operated by Evelyn Dorsey, sole trustee. Mitchell Coleman, former partner, is a convicted perjurer and forger. Case No. CR 2024-03871, Bancroft County Superior Court." Every family is asked if they wish to include the notice. Most do, some with a knowing nod, some with a request to enlarge the font for the back page. It has become a small piece of local lore, a testimony that even in the funeral business, accountability buries shame. I still visit Leonard's grave every Sunday. I bring fresh white roses because they were his favorite, and I sit on the marble bench we installed nearby. I tell him about the new cooling slab that uses an eco-friendly refrigerant, the grief counseling room we opened in the old carriage house with a bay window and soft chairs, the way the community has healed around honest burial rites. I think about how a man who never raised his voice, who kept his warnings in a leather notebook and his legal armor in a trust, managed to outsmart a schemer by writing a few sentences and consulting a decent attorney. The moral I carry now, etched into every contract I sign and every hand I shake, is that true integrity isn't loud. It's a box in a desk, a warning scrawled in the margins, a lock picked in the dark by a woman who was underestimated, a signature that means exactly what it says. Have you ever discovered a dark secret about someone you trusted completely, something that made you realize they were wearing a mask the whole time? How did you handle it? I'd like to hear your story in the comments. And if you believe that a signature should mean something, that family isn't just blood but honor, hit like and subscribe so we can keep telling stories about the quiet power of doing things right. I'll see you in the next one.